TNA and WWE signed a massive partnership that's going to go on for a couple of years. The whole idea is that we could see WWE talent, NXT talent specifically, coming over to TNA on their show and vice versa, seeing a lot of TNA talent showing up in NXT and maybe even main roster, you never know. But today, we are going to go through some of the names in TNA that have a chance of making it in NXT and showing up there. It's not new. WWE was testing this obviously in the past, where we saw the likes of Jordynne Grace and Joe Hendry show up as well. But with the Royal Rumble coming up, it got me thinking who could show up and potentially make a big impact, so to speak. And if any of the TNA talent show up at the Rumble, who do you think could end up moving over permanently? Let's first talk about Tessa Blanchard, just for a second here. No, even as the thumbnail suggests, I think. I say nah. She had a match against Jordynne Grace. Match was good, but I don't think WWE really wants to go there and bring her on to the roster in any capacity, even for a short time. I don't think they need the heat. It's not the good kind of heat that you want, I don't think. And I wouldn't see the value of Tessa Blanchard coming into NXT like now, because I don't think it's what they want. I don't think they need any headaches on the roster or any situations or whatever it is. I'm just watching TV product, and you hear things on the internet and it makes you think. I don't think it's a good idea. And her opponent, Jordynne Grace, there's a name. Now, Jordynne Grace, even backstage, maybe you guys saw this, but it looked like she was saying goodbyes, giving her goodbyes to a lot of the roster and saying adios. Didn't look like she said goodbye to Tessa Blanchard though. It really makes me think that Jordynne Grace is one of the big names from TNA that will move over permanently to WWE. I really think an early prediction for TNA talent to the Rumble showing up, I think Jordynne Grace is on that list. She has done this already, right? This is when WWE was just getting started with this little agreement and partnership. But now that it is totally public, it's front and center, and WWE is moving forward, especially with NXT. Jordynne Grace, I think, does come over. Now, the question is, if Jordynne Grace shows up in the Royal Rumble, does she go to main roster after that? The Rumble is great for that, to make, surprises, appearances, new signings, people showing up, like AJ Styles showing up and then signing with WWE and going straight to main roster. And at the time, skipping NXT altogether. Because Jordynne Grace has already spent a good amount of time in NXT, and NXT's roster, the women's roster, is really loaded. I don't know if you need Jordynne Grace in NXT right now, but if you put her over to Raw, for example, or SmackDown even, there are a lot of women on the roster, but it would help kind of fill it out, I think. WWE also is like just kind of a sidebar. I feel like they're not doing enough with like the women's divisions, like on all the shows. The matches are still very short, no clear-cut divisions. Now we just had Nia Jax and Bayley on Raw, and that was good, but not everybody's getting utilized a ton. So I wonder where Jordynne Grace would land if she showed up on Raw, for example, or SmackDown, post WrestleMania. But I do fully expect her to just say goodbye to TNA and then she shows up. Okay, next up, I gotta think that there's maybe a Hall of Fame involved in all of this. The Hardys. The Hardys are a part of TNA, and man, showing up, it's more just like a fantasy booking thing, but the Hardys music hitting at the Royal Rumble would be amazing. And by the way, I'll preface all with saying, I don't think all of these people show up like from I don't think it's like a TNA invasion thing into the Rumble. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just talking about like, hey, maybe one or two names from TNA show up. The Hardys would be incredible. Would you have both Matt and Jeff Hardy show up? Maybe. I do think at some point there will be a crossover where we will see Matt and Jeff with the TNA tag titles showing up on NXT. But could you imagine the pop that you would get if you had Jeff Hardy showing up with his music hitting and he's doing the ding and then he goes in the ring and he just does a swanton? People would go electric for it. Hardy gets eliminated. He's dumped out by Punk or Seth or somebody. And then maybe after that, you get the Hardys showing up in NXT. And I mentioned Hall of Fame. I hope that because of this partnership, it does mean the likes of the Hardys can get into the WWE Hall of Fame if they want to, and then it all aligns and they go in together. And then you can get that with like the 2025 Hall of Fame and them showing up and crossing brands, because they have so much name recognition and value still. The Hardys are still wildly popular, especially Jeff Hardy. I think you want to capitalize on it. Now, other names from TNA. I'm not too sure if they would show. I would kind of like to see Matt Cardona is one name. I like to see Cardona show up at the Royal Rumble and have a really good showing. I think eventually Cardona is going to end up back in WWE, but as Matt Cardona, doing exactly what he has been doing in the Indies and in TNA, and I want to see that version of Matt Cardona. Now, I would also like to see Brian Myers show up, and you could do that. You could have him come out separately. I think right now Matt Cardona is kind of the bigger name between the two of them. If they did come out one after the other, it'd be a really fun moment in the ring where you get the two of them, they align, and then they try to run shop on everybody else inside the Royal Rumble. It's just to make things fun and interesting. But I honestly hope that after 2025, we're getting all this crossover stuff. I do hope that we see Matt Cardona, and he's not just gonna go over to NXT. I hope that he gets like fully signed and it works out, and it's what everybody wants in terms of contracts and yada yada. And then Cardona is gonna be on like SmackDown. I'd love to see like LA Knight versus Cardona. All right, next up on Matt's little list here, the champion, Joe Hendry. Now, Hendry has been in NXT. He's even teased online like having like a match with John Cena. Now, Hendry, obviously we have seen in NXT, and because he's the TNA champion, I don't know if they would want to have the big champion showing up at the Rumble just to get eliminated. However, we did have Mickie James at the time, and she was the TNA Knockouts champion. She showed up with the belt, and that was really cool. It would be kind of a fun moment if you did get John Cena come out, his music hits, does his thing, gets an elimination or two, the lights go down, and then it's Joe Hendry music, and he shows up, and the two of them go face to face in the ring. I think people would probably pop pretty big for that. And this whole idea of like this crossover appeal, and why I'm saying like, hey, TNA talent can show up in the Rumble, it's a lot of really good marketing and exposure for TNA. It's to pump up and advertise that partnership in general, that, hey, these are some of the names that you could come and see on NXT and vice versa. Hey, look at all this talent that we have in TNA right now. This is our champion, you're our tag champions, etc. And that's where I think like you get some good publicity out of having, for example, Jeff Hardy show up or Joe Hendry. And speaking of former WWE talent, you also have Nick Nemeth, aka Dolph Ziggler. Possible that Ziggler shows up. I think that if he did honestly show up in the Royal Rumble and he's still part of TNA and everything, I think that Ziggler would get a very big pop. It's been a little while since we have seen Dolph in WWE. I think it'd be a good move. And again, I'm thinking of like, okay, you got bigger, more well-established names that were former WWE talent. They pop up in the Rumble. It's a really cool moment. WWE needs to expand. As I'm thinking about this, WWE needs to like up the Royal Rumble participants. 30 is, the roster is really big, man. 30 is tight now. Like you could go to Greatest Royal Rumble kind of deal where you get into the 40s or 50. They did a 40-man Rumble before, I felt like. But they have a lot of talent. And if you want to showcase anybody from TNA, I think they should have upped that whole thing. But yeah, Nick Nemeth, I totally can see them bringing him in just to be able to have a couple of cool moments with other WWE superstars that he's feuded with over the years. Do you put Moose in the Royal Rumble? I don't know. Moose is a great name and he's champion, but I'm trying to think of, it's the Rumble. Like if you don't follow TNA, then you may not really know who Moose is, and therefore is he gonna get like a good solid like big reaction? That's where I highlight names like Jordynne Grace, who's been established and has been on NXT TV. She's been in the Royal Rumble. I think of Matt Cardona, Joe Hendry, Hardys. These names have been with WWE in some capacity, and that's why I think that their star power would shine a little bit bigger for that large audience of WWE, the general audience. The other name is that I want to see, and mostly for like a Hall of Fame induction, is Gail Kim. Get Gail out there and let her do a Rumble spot and let her go up against a bunch of other women in the Rumble. Hall of Fame career, huge in impact in TNA for such a long time. And out of all of those names that could appear, and I looked through the TNA roster and I felt like these are kind of like the most likely people. But out of all of them, there's only a select few I think WWE would play with to come over to NXT and do the crossover. And we've already seen Cora Jade showed up in TNA, and I think that's a smart move. Like the talent exchange pool stuff is gonna happen. I think it's gonna happen regularly. I think if you did have like Obafemi versus Moose, that'd be kind of killer. Or you did champion versus champion. You had Joe Hendry going up against Obafemi. Julia and Jordynne Grace. There are some names where I think that it's worth having on NXT TV, and for signees, I think Jordynne Grace is probably the one name that they would sign on with and bring her over full time. And likewise, I think the Hardys, like I mentioned, being in the Rumble would be really cool, but I think that down the road, Once they've kind of exhausted everything in TNA and they're ready for like a Hall of Fame induction, then I think the Hardys should have kind of their last run, whatever that looks like, in WWE and do it properly. But speaking of the Royal Rumble, there could be a lot more surprises for talent that's coming back, like Alexa Bliss and a bunch of other ones. So click this video right here. We're talking all of that. And the Rumble is just a few weeks away. Have a great day. See ya.